Thank you, Deb. The verse I want to lift up is the 9th verse, very beginning. They sing a new song. They sing a song of faith. There was a campus minister years ago who was working with a young student. And that young student, in the midst of their conversations, gave his life to Jesus Christ. That pastor then gave him a New Testament and said, now begin to read this. Now that's partly a mistake to just say begin to read it, because where do you begin? Well, where do you begin a book? You begin in the beginning. So began with Matthew. And he started to read it. And there are some parts in there where, as he's reading through the life of Jesus, it gets a little depressing. Anyway, several weeks later, this campus minister met this young man again. They sat down, and he said, how's it going? How's your Bible reading going? Well, the guy said, I started to read in Matthew and reading about the persecutions and what Jesus is going through and all that. I got a little depressed, he said. So I did what a lot of other people do. You've probably done this. I decided to read the end of it first. So he said, I went to the end and I found out, you know what? We win. We win. That's a good way of describing the book of Revelation. People get confused by the book of Revelation. It's just a declaration that, hey, folks, guess what? In the end, we win. Last week, I talked about several things. We talked about priorities, talked about what it meant to be a Christian, or what our priorities are, how it's easy in this life, in this world today, to get dragged down, but how we need to learn to put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ. Now, I don't want anybody to accuse me of being a Pollyanna today. I know that there's tough stuff going on in the world. But what the message last week was meant to convey is that we have a choice. For instance, we're going to have a tough election coming up for president. We can focus on that election, or we can see beyond the election. We can look at the election and say, woe is me. Or we can look beyond the election and say, you know what? Regardless, Jesus is going to win. Jesus is going to win. When we come into church on Sunday morning, we ought to come in a spirit of joy, because we know, regardless of what the world looks like today, and regardless of what's going on in our lives, in the end, Jesus Christ is going to be victorious. So last week after the service, several people actually came up to me, or they came up to Barb and said, I really needed to hear that sermon today. I really need to hear that, that I need to have more faith. I need to put my trust in God. Maybe because of what they see going on in the world, but I think more likely for most of us it's because of what's going on in our own lives. Because some of you are struggling with some tough stuff. And if you aren't now, maybe you have been, or you will be. And I can come up here and say to you, well, what you need to do is just have more trust. If you just really trust in God more, you'll be okay. But you know what? If that's all I say, then I really haven't helped you. Because someone's going to come back and say, well, how do I do that? It's nice to hear. How do I build up a trust in God in the midst of everything that's going on? So today I just want to try to be really practical and talk about some practical things about, how do we, in the midst of everything that's going on in our lives, in the midst of this darkness of this world, how do we keep our eyes focused on Jesus Christ? How do we grow our faith and our trust in Him? And I'm going to touch on three things today. The first is the personal relationship with Jesus Christ. The second is the corporate relationship we have with each other. And the third is the way we respond to the needs of the world. So the first one is, if I want to grow in my faith, and a lot of this is going to be very personal. I'm going to talk more about me, and you can just, fill in the blanks in your own life. But if I'm going to develop a faith that conquers all fear, first and foremost, I need to draw close to God. I need to develop a close relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, how do you do that? I've got 17 grandkids. 4 of them live, 1,500 miles away. First part of June, some of you are aware that our son Steve came home. He brought the triple A's with him. Ava, Audrey, and we call her TT, but it's Andrea, the triple A. So our three granddaughters came home. We hadn't seen them for a year. They were home for 10 days. It was a great time. We got a chance to, get reacquainted. It was funny because little Audrey would come up to Auntie Beth and say, "Now, who are you?" And she'd say, "Well, I'm your daddy's sister, just like your Ava's sister, and well, then how about those two? Well, that's your daddy's mom and dad, their grandma and grandpa." So we got all reacquainted, but then they went home. And other than Skyping them, we won't see them for another year. It's going to be hard to develop a really close relationship with them. We love them, and I pray they love us. But it's a whole different relationship than the ones we have with the grandkids that live right here in Painesville, and we see them all the time. You understand that? How do you develop a relationship with God if you keep God 1,500 miles away from you and just Skype him once in a while instead of living with him on a daily basis? If you want to have a strong relationship with God that will lead to a strong faith, then you need to have a daily relationship with Jesus Christ. Daily. That means you need to find time. I need to find time, okay? Won't lay it on you. I need to find time daily. Now you say, well, you're a pastor. You get to do that all the time. You ever feel that? I'm going to blow Pastor Bob's cover here too, because you think us pastors, that's all we do is we just sit in our studies and we pray and we just, I'm going to let you in a little secret. Sometimes as pastors we get so busy taking care of the needs of the church. And yeah, we get into the Bible, but it's just so we can get a sermon ready, and so we're studying the Bible. We're not really getting a devotional time. Now that I'm retired, I've made a real commitment. Now I don't have to worry about you people. I can just kind of worry about myself, and I've really learned. A few months ago, I was reading a book. It had nothing to do with spiritual matters, but in the book they talked about a great man, John Wooden, basketball coach at UCLA. I think the greatest coach of all time. But in there it mentioned what a man of faith he was. And one of the things it mentioned in this secular book is that John Wooden read from the Bible every day. And I said, I try to do that, but I've got to recommit to that. So one of the little tricks that I've developed lately is that every night before I go to bed, I read from the scriptures. And I don't, all I try to do, and I'll tell you, maybe 90% successful, which isn't bad. I try to read one chapter. Sometimes I read 2 or 3. I feel really good about myself. But I don't say, I'm going to read a whole book of the Bible every night, and then fail, and then feel bad, and then quit. So I take a little bit, and just a little. I've got to connect with God. I've taken up walking. And I take a little pocketbook with me with some prayers in it. When I walk, I open it up, I read some prayers. It's not like I'm spending every moment of every day in touch with God, but I try to find time during every day to connect with God. And if you're having trouble connecting with God, if you're having trouble building a faith that is strong enough to conquer all fear, then I challenge you to find ways that you, not the way I do it, but the way that you become. How can you connect with God? Not just on Sunday morning, but on a daily basis. Reading the daily bread or the upper room at breakfast or taking some, but find a way to connect with God on a constant basis. In the Muslim tradition, when we're over in the Middle East, they have these prayer towers, and then 5 times a day you hear the speakers go off and you hear this gibberish, I guess you'd call it. It's Arabic, so they understand it. And I thought, somehow I have to program something within me that goes off every once in a while during the day and says, okay, it's time to stop and connect with God. Maybe we should ring our bells 5 times a day here. Stop. Tell everybody in town, okay. But I want to challenge you to do that. If you're having trouble with faith right now, just look at your own life and say, am I really taking the time to build a healthy, strong, positive relationship with Jesus Christ? What can I do if I'm not to help bring that about? So that's one thing. The second thing is how do we build a stronger faith? By sharing corporately. Now, I'm preaching to the choir today because you're all here. We need each other. We need one another. We've got some people in our church right now that are going through some really tough times. And the one thing that they will constantly say is, I don't know how I would do it without my church family. I don't know how I'd get through this without knowing that my church family's praying for me. We need each other. God created us to need other people. He didn't create us to be isolated. So we come into worship today to sing together. Not just verbally, but in a spiritual way. We come to connect with each other. Maybe you've got a group of people that you meet with on a regular basis in a smaller group. But whatever it is, to be together, to know that there are other people there that can support me and strengthen me. And by the way, let's hope that they're positive people. That's why on Sunday morning we ought to be positive. But just a side note, how do you get ready for Sunday worship? How do you get ready in the morning when you... Do you watch the news? Let me tell you something, don't do that. You can go home and watch the news after worship. You can go home and read the paper after worship. Don't get down before you get to church. Come to church in a positive attitude. But there's always somebody out there that's going to try to drag us down. The group of people that you meet with on a regular basis outside church, are they all negative? Well, guess what? That's not going to help build you up much. Find some positive people that can see beyond the darkness of this world, like that young man, and can see that there's hope. There's victory in the end. We need positive reinforcement in order to build ourselves up as people of faith. Now, we need to be realistic. Again, call me a Pollyanna. I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm realistic. I know that there are problems in the world. I know that there are things out there that aren't right. But I can't let that drag me down and defeat me. I need to know in whom I put my faith and trust. As I mentioned last week, it's not my government, it's not the economy, and it's not the military, it's none of these worldly things. I put my faith and trust in Jesus Christ. And that brings me to the last point. If I want to build a faith that conquers all fear, I can do so by moving outside of myself. We had 39 people go down to Costa Rica. I've been hearing some wonderful things. One person wrote that I don't want to leave Costa Rica. I don't want to go home. They're having a life-changing experience. They went outside of themselves into another culture. One of the things that we can build our faith is by getting outside of ourselves. Not necessarily by going to Costa Rica. You can stay right in Paynesville and do it. But yeah, there's a lot of things wrong in this world. There's a lot of needs in this world. And one of the ways that I can build faith up is by trying to make a difference. And everybody does it in different ways. So instead of just complaining about the way things are, I recognize what I can and what I can't do. There's things I can't do. I'm not going to change. My one vote isn't going to change the election in the fall. But I might be able to do one little thing in Paynesville that'll change somebody's life. I might be able to do something that'll make a difference if I just step out of my little world. So I want to encourage you. Become strong in your faith. Put a smile on your face and go forward in the knowledge that Jesus is and will be always victorious. Build that kind of relationship with Jesus Christ, with one another and with the world, that'll build a faith that allows you to go forth in victory. So we're going to sing. This all started with Helen last week, by the way. Helen said, "Can we sing number 519 sometime?" I said, absolutely, one of my favorite